Hi, everyone. Welcome to a special episode of Escape the Clock. Today, I wanted to take a step away from our usual format and focus on something that quietly shapes almost every financial decision we make. Now, this isn't another episode about how to make your plan or how to make the perfect spreadsheet. We're going to talk today about the way we talk about money. The episode is going to be about language itself, and because of that, I have a special guest. Gavin Rogers is joining me once again. And anyone who knows from last time we talked, this is my son who just recently went to college, and he's studying things like language in college. And how we talk about money is really important because we do live in a society that makes it so we don't talk about it. And studies and data have shown that actually holds people back. The more we destigmatize the language and the way we speak about money, the better we can do financially. So in today's conversation with Gavin, I was hoping to get into a little bit about what he's been learning about how language affects our conversations and shape behavior and why it matters more than we think. So Gavin, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you, Dad. I'm back again. I like you said, great introduction. I just started college, and one of the first classes I took was Honors 217 with Professor Sandoval. It's a very interesting intro to linguistics with an honors perspective, and I'm on my 8th week now, only 2 weeks left. This is kind of related to one of my end-of-year projects where we actually do an outreach activity where we help share the knowledge we've learned in the class with other people in the world, and I thought there's no better platform for me than this podcast because I don't have any media presence, so this is a great option, so thank you for letting me on. One thing I want to talk about is that what a lot of people don't know is that language is actually incredibly important for people's perception of other people, and because this is a finance podcast, I'm going to tie it in as best I can to money and how people talk about money, but also assumptions people make about their peers, because one of the best ways that people get information about their peers, whether it's through an interview or just meeting somebody for the first time, is how they speak. And I want to demystify a couple of things, particularly about a lot of stigmas and stereotypes people have developed, not purposely or maliciously, just in the background, about how various kinds of vernacular English and a specific dialects can generate a lot of false assumptions about people and how that's generally very dangerous, especially in a corporate world.
You know, as you're talking about this, the first thing that pops into my head is how language is constantly evolving and it's constantly changing. It's not just, we're not just talking about different cultures here. We're talking about generations. And I think I get the fun experience of watching how you speak versus the way your sister speaks. Now, those who don't know, Gavin has a little sister. She's 15, and she speaks fluent Gen Z. Now, I've been learning a lot about language through listening to both my children, and it's really fun to watch how they attempt to communicate with each other because they actually are technically in the same generation, but you wouldn't know that if you speak to them. And your impressions of them independently would probably be quite different. You would probably not even think they're related. But I would love to hear, Gavin, a little bit what you think about when it comes to your impression of your own peer group, or without maybe getting too hard on your sister, how you see your language as being important, and where do you see it maybe helping or maybe even hurting them as they are kind of making the language their own?
Thank you for that. I have never thought myself as being very deep in the Generation Z slang. This has constantly been a thing throughout high school and going into college. Everyone's noticed. I'm not ashamed of it. I just talk the way I talk. I do a lot of writing. That has very much shaped the way that I speak. And also my general isolation from my own generation. A little bit of regret there, but that has very much influenced the way that I talk and the way that other people's perceptions of me based on how I talk. They assume that I'm older by default, I've noticed. And they assume that I am to some degree capable when sometimes I'm not, sometimes I am. And I think that that's kind of ties back into these assumptions people make. Gen Z has been in the workforce for a while now, and especially older Gen Z, and there's been a lot of very negative stigma against them because of the quote-unquote unprofessional way that they speak. And this is just kind of wrong because the way people speak is constantly evolving, and slang generates and develops based on old slang. And all slang is just a specific piece of lexicon, linguistic lexicon that is dependent on the generation it came from. And as generations succeed each other, slang stays locked to the generation it developed in. And because of that, new slang, which is just words being generated based on the way any word is generated, can come across as unintelligent, maybe kind of detached, and that's not how that works. Slang is just a way that people talk, and it should not be a reason for you to judge a person for their intelligence, for their capability. It's just a generational word set. And if you don't understand that, that's fine. Because the only reason that older slang is more culturally appropriate is because it's been around for so much longer that it has completely entered the English lexicon. I mean, cool is such a normal word. You can say that in any professional environment. But, I mean, a while ago, in your generation, would you say that cool was very much more a slang word? That the connotation it has now wasn't as defined?
It was being normalized even then, I think.
That's probably like an older example then, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely part of my generation, but it was normalized very quickly.
I think that's the why I brought that up, because that's like, I don't even think about that as slang. It's just another connotation of the word. Cool could mean something that's interesting or exciting, or it can mean that something is actually cool of temperature. It's just become a second meaning of the word that's not even slang because of how long it's been in the language. And I think that a lot of words that seem really silly now, some of those will become probably staples of the English language as we move forward, because that's how slang works. It just evolves like that.
Well, let's take it to a little bit back to the financial side now. So I think by default, a lot of people just don't want to talk about money. They treat it in the category of maybe religion or politics, meaning it can be a very divisive topic, and so better not to talk about it. Yet the studies show that when you do talk about it, you will do better. Retirement account balances, savings account balances, everything. You will just do better. Yet it seems that most people don't speak about it. And if you be honest, the financial lexicon is very boring. It's very vanilla. Like, it's not like, I don't see a lot of slang in that area. I don't see a lot of interest in trying to adapt language to a lot of the finance. And maybe that's because we don't talk about it. But I would love to get your thoughts on, is this something that is maybe going to shift generationally, or is there something about the industry itself holding it back and hurting people?
I'm really glad you brought that up, because a very important part of language is jargon. What you just described is financial jargon. Jargon is not slang. It's also not a lexical thing. It's very specifically a category of words that are only understood by someone in that field. There's computer science jargon, there's writing jargon, and there's financial jargon. And I'm sure you've heard it before and go, what does that mean? People throw around words like the FIRE program, 401ks. People say these things, and people who don't have baseline knowledge of finances don't know what that means. And I feel like that's very limiting for a lot of people, because the moment you employ jargon in your speech, you're blocking out a whole group of people from understanding what it is you're talking about. And I think that one of the best ways to make information accessible is to limit the amount of jargon you use, unless you're using it with someone who already understands what you're talking about. It's for people who are on the same level as you, not for introducing people in. And I just think it's really important that jargon is probably one of the most limiting aspects of finances. I think people see these words they don't understand and they get really intimidated. And I think a great way to really lower the barrier of entry for a lot of these complex topics and make people more keen to talk about them is to talk about them in plain English, or whatever language you're using. It's not just, and anything I say here is not limited just to English. It's any language you speak. Just using simple wordage is incredibly important.
Okay, let me challenge that a little bit, because one of the reviews, so the Escape the Clock book that I wrote just won the American Writing Award, and because of that, they gave me a review, and I read the review, and they said that it was written in a very approachable, easy to understand way that anyone could understand. But I don't know if that's true, because I don't know if my daughter, I'm going to pick on my daughter for a second, if I wrote in a language that she can easily understand. It isn't, I explain the jargon, I explain the terms, but I don't meet, her where her language is. I don't adapt it to where how she would understand it better. I just explain it as it is in an easier to understand way. Now, where I feel like there's a fallacy there is I'm assuming that you will do the work to read the definition and understand the terms that I laid out simply and then go on. But someone who's not as motivated, they're just going to hear something they don't really understand and move on. So is there maybe a job here not to expect people to like define jargon, but instead learn how to adapt better to the target audience?
I think that it's impossible to expect someone to just outright understand anything you say. You can always limit jargon, but when you're talking about a very specialized thing like finance, it's impossible to not use it. And I think that it's not possible for you to completely eliminate jargon in anything you're talking about. But like you said, minimizing it, defining it where possible. And Jin, just to be clear, it's impossible to meet anyone exactly where they are. Everyone's language is different, and there are so many different variants and vernacular variants even and dialects of English that you can't adapt it to every single group. And I think that one thing people don't understand is that accents and dialects are different, and as is slang. You can't completely change something you're trying to say to fit those because they're all just these minute variants of one another with it's not just the way people speak, but it's also the way they string words together, the way that they kind of form sentences. It's all completely different. And so you can't write 5 variants of the same thing just to meet these target audiences. Everyone has to meet in the middle. It's the only way you can really get anywhere. And we should be really glad that at least in this country, many people speak English and we have that common ground that we all know the basic structure. And so maybe you don't have to worry about meeting Gen Z language where it's at, but rather making it as easy as possible for them to put in the little bit of legwork to meet you in the middle. And I think that's a very important distinction.
I might take a broader stroke even, because you're a visual communication major. And when I wrote the book, it was important to me not just to write words. So many finance books I've written are just dense tomes of words. And, it's easy for something as dry as finance, you kind of just tune out. And so I put a lot of illustrations, a lot of tables, a lot of graphics, all kinds of things just to appeal to both the reader and the visual learner. And so I do worry though, like if I think about a podcast for a minute, like right now, you're probably, if you understand English, you can understand likely what is being said. Now, attention is getting harder nowadays, so you have to give attention to it. But not everybody understands English. On top of that, some people are deaf, and they might need another medium to consume the information. So for a podcast, I make sure I have transcripts. I make sure... basically what I'm getting at is I don't put everything into the book. Even though the book is both graphics and word, I try to find other ways. I make sure the book is localized. I try to find lots of ways to make sure the information's out there. I guess what I'm wondering is, as a visual communication learner, is visual communications potentially a Rosetta Stone that can meet the most people?
I'm really glad you brought all that up because... in my mind, going through my studies, visual communication is very much an asset for people. And it's like math, like numbers, it's universal language. Anyone can go on the NYC subway and they can see signage, they can see iconography, and it transcends language. And in any good book, especially nonfiction, very heavily knowledge-based piece of content, it's great to have iconography and all these and like tables and all these things that you can understand regardless of language, because it fills in some of those gaps. And that even if you speak a completely different type of vernacular English, say you speak Indian vernacular English, and the way you structure your words are different. You say things in a different way. You might not understand some turns of phrase, including icons, including tables, including graphs, all these things. You can understand them regardless of where you're at. And you spoke about like the deaf population and that whole community, and that signing is a whole language. It's not like an accommodation. It is a full language with grammatical aspects. And being aware that there's people who consume and communicate and consume media and communicate differently, it's very important to be aware of that and be ready to accommodate. And it's not just accommodation; it's just communication. You shouldn't think about it as if you're making an exception because someone just speaks a different way. You should think about it as if that's just what you do. That's just how you talk. It's as much a different language as Spanish is. It's not this like thing created just for people who are hearing impaired. And so I just think it's very important to always make an effort to include transcripts, to always make an effort to communicate in different ways, because communication is such a complex topic. I'm so into it. That's why I'm taking design. That's why I'm taking linguistics. Everyone communicates differently. And to get as much a broader reach as you can for important topics like finance, you got to cover all your bases. And I think that it's just really important to know how to speak in so many different ways, and to know that just because someone speaks differently than you doesn't mean that you can't get your point across to them with a little bit of help.
Awesome. Well, that's why I do this. I'm trying to get information out, make it less stigmatized, to talk about these important topics, because just being willing to do some self-education and talk to those that we care about and trust will help us get ahead. And before you know it, maybe work will become optional for you as well. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this special episode. I hope you learned something about how we talk or don't talk about things, and how important it is to be a little bit more mindful with our communication. And thank you, Gavin, for joining.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
All right. I'll see you in next week's episode.